I suppose every story of infidelity begins with something small. A detail,
A glance.
a laugh that lingers too long. Mine started with a memory, or rather, the lack of one. I hadn't thought of Adam in nearly 25 years. Not once. Not during the silent breakfasts with my husband, not during the many birthdays, not during the long, stifling Christmas dinners with a side of the family. Not even in my dreams. And then, just like that, he appeared on the screen of my iPhone one Thursday morning in late September, as if summoned by something I didn't even know still lived inside me. Adam Connors is now following you. I was in bed when it happened, propped up with a pillow behind my back, Steve snoring beside me like some aging bear. His CPAP machine had broken the week before, and he refused to order a new one, claiming the model he liked was discontinued. I stared at the notification for a long time. Instagram wasn't where I lived. I only kept it to follow our daughter, her kids, a few yoga accounts. My finger hovered over the name. The profile photo was small, dark. But I knew. Adam Connors. My stepbrother. We weren't blood, not really even family, in any conventional sense. His mother married my father when I was 21, and he was 25, just back from grad school. The marriage didn't last long, barely 3 years before they split and scattered. But during that short, strange period, Adam and I had shared a house. Sort of. We were both too old to be called siblings. Too self-aware. Too complicated. We never talked much about those years after it ended. In truth, we never talked again. Until that morning. He had messaged me, "You haven't aged a day." I remember smiling, despite myself. I was still in my nightgown, a faded cotton thing with a frayed neckline that smelled faintly of lavender. I looked over at Steve's back. He was twitching in his sleep, like a dog dreaming. I typed back, "You're a liar." He replied almost immediately. "Not even a little. You look exactly like I remember. Sharp, sarcastic, and just a little too curious for your own good." There was something in that. A rhythm. A history. I sat up and reread the message, suddenly aware of the chill on my thighs where the nightgown had ridden up. I pulled the blanket closer, and for the first time in months, I felt awake. We started chatting. Harmless things at first. Memories.
Jokes.
What we'd been doing all these years. He had never married. Said he'd gotten close a few times. But no, nothing ever stuck. He lived in Seattle now, had done well for himself in tech. Semi-retired. Worked with wine distributors now, of course he did. That always felt like him. Smooth, indulgent, careful. A man who could wear a suit or a t-shirt and make both look effortless. I told him about my life. Marriage to Steve, which he remembered. 2 kids. Grandkids now. I had taught high school English for 20 years and recently started dabbling in watercolor. I left out the part about the antidepressants. The nights I cried in the bathroom so Steve wouldn't hear. The unspoken ache that had lodged itself in my chest like a bad tooth since the year I turned 50. He asked if I still drank red wine. I told him I preferred white now. He teased me. We kept talking. It was Adam who suggested we meet. "I'll be in San Diego for a tasting event," he wrote one morning, just a few weeks after we reconnected. "Could use some company that doesn't talk in tannins and price points." I surprised myself when I typed back, "Where and when?" He sent the details. I said I'd think about it. I didn't. I knew I was going. I told Steve I was visiting my sister. He barely looked up from his phone. "Tell her hi," he mumbled. I packed lightly, a few soft blouses, jeans, my good bra, the one I hadn't worn in years. The drive took 3 hours. I didn't turn the radio on once. We met at a little wine bar tucked off a quiet street in La Jolla. The sun was setting, casting everything in that golden, impossible light. He was already there, sitting at the bar, swirling a glass of something deep and ruby. I recognized him instantly. Older, yes, but still Adam. Still that same boyish smirk, still the same calm, watchful eyes. He stood when he saw me, and hugged me. I can't explain it. The feeling of his body pressed against mine. After all those years. My chest to his. The soft brush of his beard against my cheek. It wasn't lust exactly, not then. It was recognition. Like my skin remembered him before my mind did. "You look," he started, then stopped. "Beautiful." I felt myself blush. We drank too much, of course. Laughed too loudly. We found a corner table and shared a small plate of olives and almonds and a bottle of something Italian I couldn't pronounce. He watched me as I talked, the way no one had in years. Really watched. Like every word I said mattered. Somewhere between the second and third glass, I touched his wrist. Lightly. A reflex, I told myself. A gesture. But his skin was warm, and he didn't pull away. Later, much later, he asked if I wanted to walk along the beach. I said yes. The sand was cool, the moon fat and low. We took off our shoes and walked in silence for a while, the surf just close enough to tease our toes. Then he stopped.
Turned toward me.
"I used to wonder," he said quietly, "what might have happened if things were different, if we weren't step-anythings." I swallowed. My mouth felt dry. "I wondered too," I whispered. He reached out and cupped my face in his hands. His thumbs brushed my cheeks, tender and deliberate. I didn't move. Then he kissed me. And I let him. The hotel wasn't far. A boutique place with dim lighting and thick, elegant curtains. The kind of place where no one asks questions. He opened the door and gestured for me to go first. I did. The room smelled of linen and something citrusy. I turned toward him, and for a moment, we just looked at each other. "I shouldn't be here," I said. "I know," he replied. "But you are." He stepped closer, unbuttoning his shirt slowly, his eyes locked on mine. I felt heat flood my body, not just desire, but something deeper. Something long buried. Hunger. When he reached for the hem of my blouse, I didn't stop him. I'll spare the blow by blow. Not because it wasn't vivid, God, it was, but because what mattered wasn't just the sex. It was the way he touched me. Like he remembered my skin. Like he'd imagined this, and now he was memorizing every inch. He kissed the inside of my wrists, my collarbone, my stomach. Places Steve hadn't looked at in decades. I cried afterward. Quietly. He didn't say anything, just held me. Ran his hand up and down my back. "I miss this version of myself," I said into his chest. He nodded. I missed her too. We lay there for a long time, tangled and quiet. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel invisible. I drove home in the morning light, the Pacific still glittering in my rearview mirror, my heart heavy and full in equal measure. I didn't cry. I didn't sing along to the radio. I didn't rehearse lies in my head. I just drove, windows cracked slightly, the sea air threading through my hair like fingers that weren't quite ready to let go. I didn't know what I was now. A woman who had cheated?
Yes.
But it didn't feel like cheating. It felt like remembering who I'd been before everything became duty and dishes and dried up conversations at the dinner table. When I walked through the front door, just before noon, Steve was watching golf. Same chair. Same faded robe. He looked up, nodded. "How's your sister?" "She's good," I lied. "Busy with the kids." He grunted. "Figures." And that was it. The thing they don't tell you about sleeping with someone new at our age is how it lingers. Not just in your body, but in your breath, your walk, your silence. I'd been so used to being invisible, even to myself. After Adam, I moved differently. Slower, maybe, but also with more gravity. Like I remembered I had hips again.
Skin.
A mouth that could be kissed just because it was mine. That night, I lay beside Steve and tried to imagine what he would do if he knew. If I whispered the truth against his ear in the dark. But he turned away before I could even try. Pulled the blanket over his shoulder and sighed like a man already asleep. I rolled onto my back, closed my eyes, and there Adam was again. His mouth, his voice in my ear, his fingers trailing down the inside of my thigh like he knew that part of me better than I did. I slid my hand under the waistband of my pajamas and let the memory of him take me apart in silence. We texted. Every day. Small things. Big things. He sent me a picture of a vineyard in Sonoma with a caption that simply read, "This one smells like the back of your neck." I nearly dropped my phone in the kitchen. I told him things I hadn't told anyone. That sometimes I sat in my car outside the grocery store just to avoid going home. That I missed teaching more than I thought I would. That I hadn't felt sexy in over a decade until him. He said he thought of me when he drank Viognier. Said he could taste my name in it. Who says things like that? Adam did. And it worked. The second time happened 2 weeks later.
He flew down again. Business, he said.
This time I didn't hesitate. I booked a hotel before he even arrived. A different one, more discreet, tucked in Del Mar near the cliffs. We didn't bother with wine bars or walks on the beach. He came straight to me. I opened the door, and there he was, no pretense, no games. He kissed me before either of us said a word, backed me into the room and closed the door with his foot. We undressed each other like we were already late for something. I felt his breath hot against my shoulder as he pulled my blouse down my arms. He took his time this time. Slower. Hungrier. Like he'd been thinking about it every minute since the last time I had. He laid me back on the bed and looked at me for a long time. Not just at my body, at me. My face, my chest, my stomach, my thighs. All of it. All the parts one usually tried to hide. He didn't look away. "You're beautiful," he said again. And I believed him. That night, I let myself say things I hadn't said aloud in years. About wanting. About missing. About how lonely I'd felt, even in my own skin. He listened. Then he pulled my leg over his hip and kissed me so deeply I forgot my own name. After, he made us tea in the little hotel room kettle. Sat in bed beside me, naked, his legs crossed, steam curling from the mug in his hands like incense. "You ever think about leaving him?" he asked. It wasn't a challenge, just a question. I sipped my tea, thought about the empty dinners, the sighs, the way Steve only touched me in passing now, as if I were a lamp he had to reach past. "I used to," I said finally, "before the kids left, before the routines settled in like sediment. And now." I stared at the steam. It made my eyes water. I don't know. Maybe I just needed to remember that I still exist. Adam leaned over and kissed my temple. "You do. And then some." The third time was in a cabin, a wine lodge in Santa Ynez. He invited me under the pretense of helping with a pairing event. I almost laughed, but I said yes. I told Steve it was a watercolor retreat. He barely looked up from his phone. Something changed that weekend. The way Adam touched me. The way I touched him back. It wasn't just sex anymore.
It was intimacy.
Familiarity. A rhythm that had its own pulse. He cooked me breakfast, soft eggs, sourdough toast, strawberries with balsamic. We danced barefoot on the wooden floor to some old jazz record. I watched his hands as he poured me a glass of wine, the way his wrist curved, the veins beneath his skin. He undressed me by the fire, not quickly, with intention, as if each button he slipped through its hole was a word he was finally saying aloud. We made love on a bearskin rug, slow and quiet, the firelight dancing across the walls. I wept again, not from guilt, but from the unbearable ache of being seen. Afterward, I asked him what he wanted from me. From this. He didn't answer right away. Just touched the inside of my wrist with his thumb. "I don't know," he said. "But I don't want it to stop." Neither did I. Back home, things with Steve grew quieter. More hollow. He didn't notice the change in me. Or maybe he did and chose not to speak. Sometimes I watched him eat and wondered if he had secrets too. Maybe we were both just playing roles now. Husband.
Wife.
Set pieces in a well-worn play. The next time Adam messaged me, I sent him a single word. "Soon." He replied, "Name the place." By now we had a routine. A rhythm. Secret weekends, new cities. Sometimes it was a coastal hotel. Sometimes a private Airbnb in some leafy suburb. We played house, almost. Bought groceries. Took long showers. Slept tangled and warm, limbs wrapped around each other like ivy. He'd rest his hand on my hip in the mornings, just lightly. Like a question. And every time the answer was yes. There's a strange kind of power in secrecy. A sharpness. You see yourself differently. More alive. more deliberate. And it wasn't just about sex anymore. It was the way he said my name. The way he brushed my hair back from my face after I came, whispered, "You're safe here." I hadn't felt safe in years. I started writing again. Little essays. Poems. Things I hadn't touched since college. Adam read them. Encouraged me. He said I was too bright to keep shrinking myself. "I wish you'd known yourself this way years ago," he said once. I didn't have permission, I told him. "You do now." I was two people, split clean down the middle. One who made casseroles and folded laundry. One who wore lace beneath her coat and kissed her stepbrother in rented beds. And yet, I didn't feel like a liar. I felt real. I felt full. I felt more like myself than I had in 30 years. There's a particular kind of silence that comes after deep intimacy.
Not awkward.
Not uncertain. A kind of shared stillness. Like both people are listening to the same quiet echo in the dark. That's what it felt like, waking up next to Adam after our fourth time away together. We were in a small lake house just outside Ojai, surrounded by tall oaks and early mist. The bed was wide and heavy with white linen. I woke to the sound of birds, his body warm behind me, arm draped across my waist, fingers lightly resting on my belly. I didn't move, just let myself feel the weight of him, the rhythm of his breathing, the unguardedness of sleep. He murmured something, my name maybe, and pulled me closer without waking fully. I remember thinking, this is the version of me I wish the world knew. Not the polite woman in comfortable shoes. Not the wife who clears the table before anyone's finished eating. But this woman, flushed and loose and still humming from the night before. I wanted to stay in that bed forever. But the weekend always ended. And I always went home. The weeks between our meetings were getting harder. At first, it had felt like a beautiful, private indulgence. A rediscovery. Something personal. Now it felt like a parallel life. One I wanted more of. I would catch myself looking at my calendar and counting days like a teenager, texting Adam with half-teasing questions like, "How much trouble can we get into next Friday?" He always replied, "Let's find out." Something shifted the day I ran into Linda Harris at the farmer's market. We taught together for over a decade before I retired. She was the type who noticed everything and didn't mind asking. "You look different," she said, holding a bunch of kale like a microphone. "Did you cut your hair?"
No.
She tilted her head. "Well, something's different. You're glowing." I laughed, a little too loudly. "Must be all that watercolor therapy," I said. She narrowed her eyes. "Or a man." My face must have betrayed something. Her lips curved into a knowing smile. "Good for you," she whispered, leaning in. "Whatever it is.
Keep it."
We disappear too easily at our age.
I didn't sleep well that night.
Not because I was afraid of being found out, but because I realized someone had noticed. I had become visible again, not just to Adam but to the world. And that terrified me more than the lie itself. Steve remained largely oblivious. Or perhaps he had made peace with the emotional distance between us long ago. There were occasional flashes of old intimacy, a shared laugh over dinner, a brief kiss on the cheek before he left for the hardware store, but mostly we existed like two people who used to be something. I didn't hate him, but I didn't long for him either. That scared me too. The next trip was different. Adam booked us a small inn on the Oregon coast. He said he wanted to watch the waves with me. When I arrived, he had already lit the fireplace. The room smelled of salt and smoke and something musky I couldn't place. I kissed him before I even closed the door. Pressed him against the wall, my coat still on, his hands sliding up beneath it, finding skin, heat, need. That night was raw. Fast at first, then slow and aching. He undressed me with reverence, knelt between my legs, and looked up at me like I was the only thing he'd ever worshipped. When we finished, I lay on his chest, my ear to his heartbeat. "Do you love me?" I asked quietly. There was a pause. Then, yes. The word cracked something open in me, because I already knew I did too. I didn't say it back, not right then. But I kissed him.
Slowly. Deeply.
Told him with my body. And when I finally said it the next morning, sunlight streaming in, our legs tangled under the sheets, he smiled like he'd been waiting years to hear it. It became harder to pretend at home. Steve tried, in his own way. He asked if I wanted to go out for dinner one night. Suggested we visit our daughter in Santa Cruz the following weekend. Little gestures. Tentative steps. I wanted to accept. I wanted to mean it. But all I could think about was Adam's voice in my ear, the way he said my name when I came apart beneath him. I started sleeping in the guest room. Said it was for my back. He didn't question it. Adam and I began talking about what came next. He was gentle about it, but honest. I don't want to be a secret forever, he said. Not because I need the world to know, but because I want you. In real life. Not just on weekends. I didn't have an answer. How could I walk away from a 30-year marriage? From family dinners and grandkids and birthdays and the thousand shared rituals of a life? But how could I walk away from this? From myself? The next time we met, it rained. We were in a cottage up in the redwoods, tucked between trees that felt older than time. The roof sang with water. We made love slowly that night, under a wool blanket, the fire casting shadows on the ceiling. Afterward, I curled against him and whispered, I want more. He didn't ask what I meant. He just kissed the top of my head and held me tighter. I started writing again in earnest. Essays. Fiction. A long, unfinished piece about a woman who meets a man from her past and finds herself changed. I read parts to Adam. He said the sentences tasted like skin and secrets. He said, You're more than alive now. You're awake. I thought of telling Steve. More than once. But every time I imagined the conversation, I saw his face crumple. Not with rage, but with the quiet disbelief of a man who hadn't noticed the house burning until it was ash. I wasn't ready to set fire to everything. Not yet. One night, as Adam and I lay in bed in a small cabin in Big Bear, he turned to me and said, If you asked me to wait, I would. For a while. But not forever. I nodded. I don't expect forever, I said. But I think I'm finally brave enough to want something more than a safe life. He didn't say anything. He just pulled me into him and kissed me like a promise. At home, Steve noticed I wasn't wearing my wedding ring. Did you lose it? He asked one morning over eggs. I looked down at my bare hand. It had felt heavy for weeks. I hadn't even realized I'd stopped putting it back on. I think I just needed a break from it, I said. He frowned. From the ring? I looked at him for a long time and said, Yes, from the ring. The next morning, I messaged Adam. I'm ready, but I need time, and honesty, and patience. He wrote back, I've waited decades for you. I can wait a little longer. There are moments in life where silence becomes louder than any words. One of those moments came late one night, sitting alone in the kitchen, long after Steve had gone to bed. I stared at my reflection in the black glass of the window. My hands curled around a cup of chamomile tea that had long gone cold. Outside, it was raining again. A soft, persistent tapping against the windows, like the world itself was asking if I was ready. I was. And I wasn't. But I had already crossed a line months ago, not just by sleeping with Adam, but by remembering how it felt to live for myself again. To want. To be wanted. And that kind of awakening doesn't go quietly back to sleep. I told Steve the truth 3 days later. Not all of it. Not right away. But enough. We were sitting in the den. I had turned the TV off. He looked at me like I was about to ask for money, or tell him I dented the car. I need to talk to you, I said. My voice was calm. Too calm. He sat up straighter. Everything okay? No, I said gently. Not really. I watched the realization dawn in his eyes before I said a word more. A quiet tightening of the jaw. A shift in his breath. I told him I'd been seeing someone. That it wasn't just physical. That it hadn't been going on forever, but that it was serious. And that I had fallen in love. He didn't yell. He didn't cry. He just looked at me for what felt like hours, and then he said, Is it him? I blinked. Who? He cleared his throat. Your stepbrother. It hit me like cold water. He knew. Maybe not all along. But somewhere along the way, he'd pieced it together. Why didn't you say anything?
I asked.
He shook his head slowly. I think I just didn't want it to be true. Silence sat between us like a third person. Then he said, "You haven't looked at me like you loved me in a long time. Maybe I stopped looking at you that way, too." That hurt more than I expected.
Because it was true.
We didn't split right away. Old habits die slow.
We talked. We cried. We fought, gently.
We spent days in different corners of the house, exchanging only essentials. I slept in the guest room full-time now. Not because I had to, but because I couldn't pretend anymore. One night, we sat at opposite ends of the couch and tried to sort through what 30 years meant now. "I don't hate you," he said. "I know," I whispered. "I don't even think I blame you." I nodded. "But you don't love me the way you used to."
He looked down.
Maybe I don't know how. When I finally told Adam, he didn't react with joy or relief. Just quiet understanding. "I know how hard that must have been," he said. "I don't want you to feel rushed."
I don't, I said.
"But I do feel guilty. For not doing it sooner. For not being honest with him. And with myself."
Adam nodded.
Then he said something I'd never forget. "You're allowed to rewrite your story. Even if you're halfway through the book." The first night I stayed at Adam's place, really stayed, not just visited. We didn't sleep together. We lay in bed, fully clothed, hands clasped between us, and talked. He told me about the time he almost married someone in his late 30s but backed out at the last minute. About how he'd always felt like he was waiting for something more, even when he didn't know what it was. I told him about how I used to write poems in the bathtub when the kids were young. How I missed being looked at with curiosity instead of familiarity. How I'd once stood in the grocery store frozen in front of the yogurt aisle, unable to remember what kind Steve liked. We laughed. We cried. We kissed like it was the first time, not hungry, not desperate. Just true. Divorce at our age isn't dramatic. It's paperwork and sorting through photos. It's telling your adult children you're splitting up and watching them pretend not to be shocked. It's learning how to sleep in a new bed, in a new place, with your own name on the lease again. It's both terrifying and liberating.
And it's not fast.
But it's real. One evening, about 6 months later, Adam and I hosted a small dinner for friends at his place. Nothing fancy, roasted salmon, greens, a bottle of Pinot. I wore a simple blue wrap dress he loved. My hair was pulled back loosely. Someone asked how we met. Adam and I exchanged a glance. "I guess you could say we go way back," I said, smiling. They laughed. It wasn't a lie. It just wasn't the whole truth. And that was okay. Sometimes, when I lie in bed beside Adam, listening to the wind in the trees, I wonder what might have happened if I'd never opened that door in Santa Barbara all those months ago. If he'd never touched my wrist. If I'd never let myself say yes. I might still be living in that house. Still sitting across from a man who didn't know how to look at me anymore. Still tucking parts of myself away. But I said yes. And that one small, quiet choice cracked open the rest of my life. We still argue, Adam and I. We're not some fantasy. We leave dishes in the sink. We bicker about how to stack the dishwasher. We disagree on movies. He snores. I steal the covers.
But he sees me.
And I see him. Every line. Every flaw. Every old scar. And he touches me like I'm the only story worth telling. It took me over 50 years to find myself. To want something more than polite comfort. To let my body say what my mouth was afraid to. And in the end, it wasn't just about Adam.
It was about me.
The woman I buried under good manners, mothering, and keeping the peace. She's not buried anymore. She's here. She's flawed and aging and radiant. And for the first time in decades, she's in love.